Nancy. Thank you for having me. Thank you, Faisal, for having me. It's really an honor, and what an amazing amount of work that you've done to create the Palestine Museum. Very honored to be here.
Thank you, Ronnie. Perhaps you could start by telling us a little bit what was it like for you growing up in a Palestinian family in Chicago? And feel free to mix your talk with the music of your choice as you will.
Sure thing. I was very fortunate to have grown up in Chicago because my father is from a town in the West Bank called Betunia, and it's basically tied to Ramallah, so it's part of the Ramallah metro area. And I can call Ramallah a metro area now too. um, it was interesting because Chicago served as one of those places that was a hub for many people coming from my dad's town specifically. So people have actually come to Chicago from Betunia, from my family specifically, as far back as 1893. And we've even had many members of our family who were part of the military as far back as World War One, World War Two, and even Vietnam. Um, many of them have had service as real, Americans. However, during that entire period of time, nobody's ever lost sight of their identity of being Palestinian. And so we really grew up with it in our household. The community that we were in the southwest suburbs of Chicago was a very thriving community. I mean, to this day, right now, you can go down there and they have a little area that they literally call Little Palestine. And so, as far as we were removed from our homeland, it felt like home was my people in a sense that they were here with us. And so we grew up in a musical household because my father was a musician and my brother as well, and that was really my portal into understanding my Palestinian identity. I lived with my grandparents as well, so we spoke Arabic at home. I remember my grandfather seeing my brother and I just starting to learn some of this music, and every day, literally every day, he would come down and ask for two songs. He would ask for Muhammad Abdul Wahab, Ya Garat al Wadi, and which is a really old song by an Egyptian performer, composer. And he would also ask for the Palestinian song Ya Zarif at Tul, which, just to give you a little hint, and I'll probably play it later, but it has that sound to it. يا ظريفة طول وقفت أقول لك رايح على الغربة وبلادك أحسن لك خايف يا ظريف تروح وتتملك وتعاشر الغير وتنساني أنا. And I remember when he encouraged that. My grandfather was a pious man. I wouldn't say religious, but very pious. He and his friends and the Palestinian elders, because the most of the people that were here were either Palestinian or Jordanian, they got together and they built a mosque called the Bridgeview Mosque in Bridgeview, and it truly served more as a community center at that time. There wasn't this sense of orthodoxy that we see a little bit more of today. And the sheikh that was there was a very open-minded, moderate individual, Sheikh Zayed, who was also from Betunia in Palestine. And his daughters ended up becoming pillars of the community, leaders, being on the council in the city of Chicago, working as teachers. And seeing those models in front of me made me understand that regardless of where my family's from, being Palestinian or otherwise, it's important to always be involved in your community. And I think those are certain traits that uh, just Palestinians in general tend to have by virtue of the fact that Palestine is such a cosmopolitan place. It's not this monolith. If you go to the north part of Palestine and Haifa and Al Jalil, it's completely different than what you find in the West Bank, which is completely different in Gaza. So there's a lot of different aspects to it. I say it was very helpful though growing up here because I got to see not only the Muslim community, but also the Christian community that comes from Palestine. We have a sizable Ramallah population here. So I would play often at the Ramallah Club. And again, being in Chicago was very unique because I got to meet people of Lebanese origin, Moroccan origin, Syrian origin, and learning all of their songs. And in doing that, I not only realized the diversity of the Middle East and the different dialects that I was picking up, and understanding that my dialect itself also was very unique. Where my mother was from Jerusalem, so when I speak to her, it was the Jerusalem Medani dialect. كيفك اليوم يما إن شاء الله كل شيء تمام. Yeah, you know. But if I talked to my dad or my grandparents, it was the total Falahi dialect, which was كيف حالكم اليوم شو بدكم تسووا. So it was really very interesting to see the diversity of our people in general here in Chicago. And I really got involved in the community through music even more because with a family band, we started playing weddings. I would say, and I'm not exaggerating, we probably played at least 100 weddings a year, at least 150 weddings a year for about 15 years. So I got to see a lot of Palestinian weddings and the variety of different ones too. Some from the West Bank, some from the northern part of the Galilee. So it's an interesting thing to grow up Palestinian here and have that identity. I remember visiting Palestine on a few occasions with my grandparents, initially to till the land, and I fell in love. I wanted to move. I even came back here and fast tracked getting a degree, my high school degree, so that I could just move. And I had my plan set. I wanted to go to enroll in Bidazet University. My aunt at the time had taught English there, and she helped me get in for an orientation. And this was just as they announced the Oslo Accords. So my naive 16-year-old self thought, I want to go, and that's it. I want to live there. And so when I came back, I think I saved every single newspaper clipping that had anything to do with the Oslo Accords, peace in Palestine. Because prior to that, if I told people I was from Palestine, I would get things like, "Oh, I love Pakistani food," and I'd have to say, "Not Pakistan, Palestine." Jesus, that kind of Christianity, uh, and people didn't really understand or know where it was. Honestly, some people really thought places like Bethlehem, Jerusalem, or the Galilee were just simply words in a Bible of an ancient, far-off land, but not really visceral places that people existed. And so, yeah, that was. It's been interesting here, especially now, where being in Chicago or in a place like Chicago or in America in general has afforded me a lot of opportunities to express being Palestinian, uh, but also being American and understanding the fine line that I've had, this strange relationship I've had with this country, even being born here. Because when you get older and you start to understand everything from the politics and all of those things, you realize like the best thing I can do if I wanted to have any form of resistance or to represent my people is to exist and to do it unapologetically. And that is the pathway that I took, and I've used the arts to kind of try to convey that message. So why don't I play a little piece for you? And this is one of the first pieces that I actually learned early on. My dad made sure that we had a healthy dose of Egyptian music growing up, not just Palestinian music. But I always resonated with Muhammad Abdul Wahab ever since my grandfather actually played one song from him, and I'll just play an excerpt from it. But he said, this is Abdul Wahab doing the song Palestine. أخي جاوز الظالمون المدى فحق الجهاد وحق الفداء أخي جاوز الظالمون المدى I won't go on with the whole thing because it's a
هتخلينا نعيط هلا.
well, it was funny. Like I would hear these songs and I'd play them on just constant rotation on cassette, because that was how I want to. I can't. I have to extend a special thanks to all of the grocery store owners here in Chicago, most of whom were Palestinian, for having great taste, because that was where the only place I can actually find all of the music that I learned, all the Kulthum, Abdul Wahab Palestinian songs, all of these cassettes, because they would house them. So on a weekly basis, I would go there and purchase these things. It was the only resource. There weren't people teaching music. There was no internet. I grew up. I tell my students BI, before internet, and it was the only way. And it was a great interaction because I would talk to the store owner. He'd give me an anecdote about Bab al Amud in Jerusalem, or him growing up in Ramallah. I learned little things like, my father would say, there used to be a band that played at Al Bardoni in Ramallah, and they would play the Beatles and Rolling Stone covers. And my mind was just blown to think, like, wait, they were playing rock and roll in Palestine? And that actually led me to understand we are a very cosmopolitan people. We are really throughout the world. I'm going to play one of the songs that really appealed to me from Abdul Wahab, which was the title appealed to me. It's called Balad al Mahbub, Country of the Beloved. And it goes like this.
Ronnie, what would you say if I ask you to play Garat Al Wadi? Just one segment, the one that starts with وتعطلت لغة الكلام. Is that doable?
1 second.
I'm your father's generation, of course.
I'll have to decline only because I don't remember it.
That's fair enough.
And I'm going to be honest with you. But, there were plenty of other pieces that, we grew up hearing a lot of different things, a lot of wedding songs, a lot of the folk music of Palestine. But then, once in a while we have like a Masir Khalifa song like منتصب القامة يمشي مرفوع الهامة يمشي منتصب القامة يمشي مرفوع الهامة يمشي والكف كف الزيتون وعلى كتفي نعشي وانا امشي وانا امشي وانا امشي وانا امشي. And then of course شدوا الهم يا ويك بينده عالبحري يا بحري هيلا 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 هيلا. There's so much, if it's been an interesting world to try to navigate being Palestinian. And I see one of the questions, one of the folks here asked, do you participate in projects dedicated for the peace in the Middle East with musicians from Israel? I dedicate myself to peace all over the world. I studied lots of different styles of music: Indian music, North African music, West African music, Andalusian music, Balkan music, Turkish music, Ottoman music, and I see how closely related everybody is. I try not to relegate our existence to borders that were drawn by colonial rulers in the past 200 years or so. Um, I know that I come from a region, but genetics tell us too that we all come from someplace too, and we're a mix of different places. Um, and when you get to places like Palestine or Middle East in general, people are, truly from many different places. It's a very diverse area. On the topic though of, there's a difference. I make a distinction, and my parents made sure to let us know to make this distinction. Is there's a difference between people who are Jewish, and there's a difference between Israel and a Zionist government, for example. What is Zionism versus what is Judaism? And my grandmother, being a Jerusalemite herself, often recounted to me stories of growing up in Romema in West Jerusalem, where my family owned 3 buildings that are still there, incidentally, and our family name, is engraved in those buildings. However, it's in West Jerusalem now, which is predominantly Jewish. And she would tell me that uh, the building was occupied by Jews, Palestinian, Muslims, and Christians of European and Middle Eastern descent, and that the rabbi who lived across the hall from them, his children would call my great great grandfather Baba. So it was just, for me, that was very touching to understand that there was this sense of neighborly camaraderie. She said people were more interested in being good neighbors than they would in being good Jews, Christians, or Muslims. And so I've always looked at that, for me, as a way to understand that, you know, Muslim, Christian, and Jewish traditions and culture and history is a part of my history. If it's from that land and my family is from that land, all of it is part of my history as well. And so I started to really, when I started teaching, I started receiving phone calls from 2, 3 different cantors from the Jewish tradition asking to learn maqam music, which is the music of that region. And I thought this is rather interesting. And one of them enlightened me about a Jewish tradition that are hymns called piyutim. And piyutim are basically hymns that were often written during the Andalusian period or after. And what was fascinating to me about them, though, is that they had traditions that were explicitly from Iran, Syria, Egypt, Morocco. And I saw this Arab Jewish kind of trend. And it fascinated me even deeper because I thought, well, there's something very similar with this music. And I started to really dig deeper into that and become a little bit more familiar with this tradition. And through things like that, even having played an entire Mizrahi or Arab Jewish service in some synagogues, I thought, here I am, the Palestinian. What can I do? I've had students who were Jewish. I've had cantors coming to me, and that doesn't mean it didn't come with any blowback either. I would have some people accuse me of saying, well, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? And I thought, this is the only one of the few ways I can contribute is if I extend myself to have dialogue with people who are like me, victims of circumstance in many ways. And I'm not talking about Israelis. I'm talking about people living in America who might be of Jewish origin. And and one of these people, I don't know why, it just came to me, and I said to him, "Well, look at it this way: if anybody asks them where they learned how to do any of this stuff, they're going to say my teacher was Palestinian." And to me, that spoke volumes. That was my form of resistance in some ways, of to make sure, or can I say just not resistance, but say my ithbat al-wujud, my proof of existence, kind of, that, I'm here, I exist, and this is my culture. And so that's kind of, I'm answering this question I think Anna had asked about advocating and dedicating peace in the Middle East. Who doesn't want peace in the Middle East? I'd love to go back to my home in Palestine and live. It would be a lovely thing. But what I do know is that I can learn as much as I can about that area, about Palestinian culture, about Jewish culture in Palestine, even before 1948, about the Middle East in general, and try to spread that as my diplomacy, so to speak. Um, Somebody had asked when and why did my family emigrate to the United States. It depends. Again, I think we were talking about this earlier, Nancy. I've had family members who have come to Chicago specifically as far back as 1893 as part of the World Music, as part of the World's Fair. And they kind of stayed. And many people from my dad's town, Bethune, came to Chicago and stayed as well. My immediate grandfather came in like 1952, 53. After 48, he saw where things might be headed, and he wanted to also establish. And everybody in the world after World War II was in a state of diaspora in some ways, right? And my wife is Polish. Her grandmother was on a plane after being in an internment camp by the Nazis, and she chose Chicago, as many, many, many Polish people did. So it's an interesting thing to see how in the 50s this immigration, this diaspora, came to Chicago. And then my father came in 64, and then my mother, after he married her in Palestine, they came in 76. And I have family here and I have family there still. So we have roots there. We have land and a home, and a place that I hope to take my daughters in the future. And I did take my oldest daughter there in 2015, so that she also knows that, by the way, you have home here. This is also your land. This is also your home, and this is your ancestry. Um, but I probably have talked a lot. I should probably present something to you. Um, I'm going to present an original piece of music that is, one trying to find themselves prior to myself to making a commitment of being a musician and trying to be a voice, not just for Palestinians, but for the Middle East in general, and for my heritage in general. I made a decision in 2004 to pursue music as a full-time vocation. Uh, Prior to that, obviously, we played with the family band a lot, every weekend. But it was also kind of that milieu where people would kind of say things like, "Well, when are you going to get a real job, kid?" And I got the real job. I worked in the corporate world for a little while, but I realized that I wasn't making the contribution to humanity or to society that I wanted to. I loved what I did, and so that's when I just kind of started playing music a little bit more. And around 2004, after George Bush had gotten elected, and the war in Iraq had begun, uh, I couldn't help but just think how culpable I am in this, paying my taxes, even to fund the, for lack of a better term, the killing of my own people in some ways. And so I needed a break, and I needed to rediscover myself. I was, mid 20s with that existential crisis that one has at that age. And I had studied French here in America for 6 years, and so I threw a dart at the map and said, I'm going to go to France and just find myself a little bit. So I ended up going there and living for a little while, and discovering a lot of musicians. My French had improved so much that They were actual refugees coming from Gaza, who people would direct to me because I was running a cafe at the time over there, and all of a sudden, because I was the Palestinian, everybody would send all the Palestinians to me. And so he would ask, one of my friends there from Gaza would ask, "Can you come and translate for me? Can you help me out with this?" And then he wanted to start take oud lessons, and I realized, like, for him it was therapy, being away from where he was, and music really found a way to calm his soul, to temper the anxiety. And that was when I realized, like, boy, I can do a lot with music. I'm going to go back to Chicago, and I'm going to just do this full time and find a way to represent my culture, both Middle Eastern, Palestinian, and American, to the public. So while I was there, this is one of the pieces that I wrote, and I call it Zahma, because I peered out of the window one day in my small little box of an apartment in Paris, and just saw everybody running about, going nowhere, kind of like fleas or ants in a colony. And I called it Zahma, which means crowded. So this was an original piece, and it's funny too, because, like, well, what do you call this piece? And for me personally, I would say, yeah, this is a Palestinian piece, because I'm Palestinian and I wrote it. Uh, just like many other people might consider, oh, that's a Brazilian piece because the person is of Brazilian origin. Nobody, when we think about classical Western music and we say, something like, we don't say, like, oh, that's a German piece. Often people say that's a classical piece, but truly it is kind of, a German piece. Uh, and in that sense, I say this only because we don't often find or associate who's a Palestinian composer, for example. We say that about Egyptian, we say that about Lebanese, but growing up, I didn't hear about that as often as I did until I started to meet some. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention some of the influences that I had in my life that helped me not only retain my culture, but to also see that there were other Palestinians doing this sort of thing on an academic level, on a professional level. One of my, significant role models, I would have to say, was the wonderful musician, oud, and violin player Simon Shaheen. And I remember going to Tower Records one day, and he had an album called Turath, and I went and I first of all, I was fascinated that I found a Middle Eastern cassette tape in an American record shop in the international section, because at that time that was very it was not something that you would find. I would have to usually go to the grocery stores to do so. And as soon as I found that and heard the oud and heard the different style that differed from what I was playing in the weddings, because at the weddings I was playing keyboards, because it was a wedding and you needed the volume and you needed these songs to sound, to make people move. But when I discovered him, I saw not only did he resurrect a classical Middle Eastern tradition, but also had some original compositions of his own on there. I thought, oh, there are Palestinian composers out there. And around that time, when I came, when I grew a little bit older, there was a gentleman that came to Chicago by the name of Isa Boulos. And Isa was from Ramallah. Because up until then, a lot of people that played the classical tradition, I usually found to only be from the northern part of Palestine, maybe as far as, as south as Nablus, but mainly from Haifa, from Nasra, Nazareth, Jaffa. And they were listening to this classical style of repertoire. But because we would end up playing what we would call the music style of tarab. Tarab is a listening style of music that you sit to fill the head, so to speak. And I found that a lot of the music from the West Bank was very folk driven. And so that was the music I was playing at the weddings. So when I discovered somebody like Isa Boulos or even Jack Laham, these are folks mainly based in Ramallah, playing this style of music, playing the classical form of music, I was thoroughly intrigued because I thought, well, I'm from the West Bank and you're like me and you have that same taste. I love that. Um, and that's when I realized also that Isa really took the reins of the music scene in Chicago and elevated it tremendously by becoming the music director of the University of Chicago Middle East Music Ensemble. And he he presented pieces. He presented himself as unapologetically Palestinian, but was also navigating world music elements among people. And I bring all this up again. I just want to give him credit, particularly right now. I want to congratulate him because he just received a PhD in the Palestinian music studies. Uh, so it gives you a lot to aspire to, having these role models around you and seeing what they do that is a contribution not only to their people or on behalf of being Palestinian, but to society and to the diaspora as a whole and to the Middle East as a whole. I'm going to play a little piece of his to say that I'm playing contemporary Palestinian music. So this is a piece that he composed by Isa Boulos called Raqs al Janub. I'll leave you also with one small anecdote about Isa uh, that made me even prouder and understand the reach that we can have. I was visiting, I was doing research for my play, Ziriab, in Andalusia. And I was already south, and I thought, let me go to Tangier. And I took the boat over because I wanted to do more research on the Arab Andalusian tradition there. And I found this little cafe in Tangier near El Kasbah, and it was an Arab Andalusian cafe with these older musicians, Arab Andalusian musicians, playing inside. And one of them saw me with my oud and gestured for me to come in. And as we're jamming and we're selecting tunes that we might all know in common, one of them he said, "You're Palestinian," and he said, "You know the composer Isa Boulos?" And I thought, did I just travel like, over 7,000 kilometers for somebody to know my friend in Chicago? I said, yeah, and he proceeded to play one of Isa's pieces that was rather new. It was a sama'i, which is a classical tradition, and I let Isa know that as well. And I just thought, uh, it's amazing. Your song, your composition reached somebody so far away. It just, again, it's resistance through existence. Proving that we exist. We are a culture. We are not just a diasporic people. So this is a piece of his called Raqs al Janub, Dance of the South. So that's just a little excerpt of the piece, which is a little bit longer. But you know, I would often try to follow these composers and try to find, who, what can we talk about in Palestine, because often in this tradition of Middle Eastern music, you either sang often Egyptian dialect or Lebanese dialect, and that was what people would know throughout the Middle East. And something that often perturbed me really was like, well, how come the Palestinian dialect isn't really heard as much throughout this diaspora or throughout the Middle East? And obviously, the political situation does make it difficult, but it's also just because the opportunities. I haven't heard of anybody coming out there. But then I really started to find these artists in the diaspora. I ran into and worked with several musicians who came from the Edward Said Conservatory in Ramallah and studied at Berkeley College, something that was really facilitated largely in part due to Simone Shaheen working there and creating this pipeline, if you will. And some of those same artists I would end up playing with or doing things with. For example, one particular artist was Tariq Rantisi, who's a brilliant percussionist, and he plays. He's in New York right now, but he went to Berkeley College in Boston. He's originally from Ramallah, and I remember I was doing the Jungle Book, and we were in Huntington Theater in Boston, and I needed to leave early so that I can present another play at the McCarter Theater in New Jersey, and I needed to find somebody to sub for me, but somebody who would understand the milieu of Middle Eastern and Indian music as well as jazz. And I felt so good to know that I could find another musician, particularly one who was Palestinian origin, that was able to do this, and it just gave me a lot more hope. And after that, I started to discover so many other musicians. One really wonderful artist that I've been following lately is Nassim Al Atrash, who's a brilliant cellist from Palestine as well, and they're all out there. Amel Kawash, Nini Makhshesh. There's so many amazing artists out there right now, and I think they're all also using their artistry to promote their culture, to promote a human side, trying
We
not to.
had Emil Kawash on last month here on the show.
I remember you told me about that. She sang, I believe, Halalalaya.
Yeah, yeah.
And but let me see. Also, somebody had asked, can you speak about how music is both a universal language and rooted in a place? Um, the universal language. A lot of people, especially in the field of ethnomusicology, challenge and debate this term. I look at it from a perspective of sound, especially as a recording engineer. Sound is absolutely universal in many ways, but the meaning of music to people is not quite universal. But the fact that they interpret sound as something is a universal trait, because sound is vibration ultimately. Now, music as a cultural element, let's say it is a universal language with many dialects, and with those dialects come many different meanings to different people. It's been an interesting thing growing up Muslim, in a very uh, secular household. My grandfather was a pious man, but it wasn't like religion that took the forefront in our lives, but it definitely informed also who I am, particularly Islamic history in general. But then again, so did playing in a lot of Orthodox Christian churches and learning hymns like احمدوا الرب لأنه صالح لأنه إلى الأبد رحمته hallelujah. And so this was a piece that I would hear as part of the traditional hymns of Orthodox Christianity, and thinking, hey, that's part of my culture too. That's part of my tradition. So were, various piyutim, I would think as well, that were part of the tradition hymns, Jewish hymns. Music as a universal language. It's a long question. It's a tough question. I do believe in the universality of music. I play in groups that advocate as such, and we talk about. I have one group that's called Surabi Ensemble, and we ended up doing a global peace tour that we took to Vietnam, Spain, Portugal, Senegal, based on the context that we had there. But we were a group that blends Arab, African, flamenco Spanish, and Indian influences, with people from each of those places. And part of the reason we wanted to do is to show that music is a language that many people can converse in. To say it's universal is not incorrect by any means, but to really say that it's a language is very correct. And in being a language, people can converse in it in many different ways. And so on that tour, we were trying to say that, hey, we're all from America. We're Americans, and America is not everything that you see on TV. Here's the diversity and a diverse population that represents America. So, like I said before, I try to use music and art in general as a way to foster global citizenry. Um, the whole Palestine question, I was a very very patriotic teenager growing up. You know, I wanted to go live back overseas. I wanted to go to Palestine, and I wanted to be in with my people in some ways. And my dad said, you can do good also here. He reminded me of that, and I started to realize that as I grew up and grew older. But even as I grew older, I started to realize more and more that when you grow up with a feeling of being somewhat stateless, I would love to go back and build a home in Palestine right now on land that I've inherited, but I can't because it's in Area C, which is declared a military zone. The land is there, but I can't take that chance. So then I feel like, well, where can I go? What can I do? That thought led me to understanding um, I'm a global citizen. And I think a lot of Palestinians consider that as well. They have Palestine in their heart, but they also consider themselves global citizens. I have relatives in Germany. I have relatives in Australia, in England, in China. I have yeah, this relative in China, in Brazil, in South America, all throughout the United States. I found out just a few weeks ago that my second cousin was just nominated for a seat in the Colorado House of Representatives. So I'm thinking like, wow, we're all over the place. It's funny. It's ironic that we don't really necessarily have a real state to go back to that has the like my Greek friends would go back to Greece, or as my Italian friends would go back to Italy. But here we are making a home wherever we go and remembering our identity through our music, through our art, and through what we do in life. Could you share any family stories you were told about the 1893 World's Fair? um, well, all I remember is I believe their names were Adnan and Mirshid, and they were from the Malley family in 1893 here. And I don't know that it was necessarily the World's Fair that brought them here as much as it was all of the hubbub around the World's Fair. Chicago really grew from the 1893 World's Fair. And on the Midway Plaisance at the University of Chicago, it was fascinating because it was the first time that they would set up tents to create these villages. And one of them was like the Egyptian village, the Algerian village. And there were Arabs coming here at the time, particularly from what was considered Greater Syria, because it was all under Ottoman rule at that time. So even Lebanese folks who would come were Syrian. Even Palestinian people who were ostensibly Palestinian may have been lumped into being Syrian or Ottoman as well. Although I will say that my grandfather's American passport said place of birth Palestine on it, because he was born at a time where it was Palestine. Um, and so those two came from the family, and they kind of established a business. This was a time where nationalism wasn't really an issue, wasn't discussed. So people were just of Arab or Middle Eastern origin. So they came and kind of set up a shop here in businesses. And many people from that town started to come thereafter. They would hear, just like any immigrant story, really. Hey, what's happening over there in the United States right now? And they would come over and establish a business or find their community. And it just so happened that the community my father's family was from in Betunia all pretty much came to settle here in Chicago specifically. And we became such a hub that people like my uncle would then start doing translations, and then we would start establishing all forms of things, even including foundations like the United Holy Land Fund that my aunt and my uncle helped to found, to provide scholarships for students in Palestine to study. But then my uncle was a translator here who helped people with everything from immigration to social work and all of those kinds of things. And I guess the greatest thing, and not to mention that a great deal of my family did serve in the U.S. military here. So it was a strange dichotomy to grow up thinking like how Palestinian I am, how American I am, but always remembering that that is my identity. That's who I am. Um, I should probably play a little more music
Ronnie,
now.
before you start, we have some question on Facebook. I know you can't see the Facebook questions
Oh
there,
no,
but
yeah,
we do have as many people on Facebook as we have on Zoom. It's a quick question. It says, do you find music expanded your definition of identity and in your particular perception of your identity?
absolutely. As I mentioned, you know, I am music. If people talk about religion and things like that, if religion is something you practice, then music is a strong portion of my religion. It's what I do. It's the way I pray. It's the me. My grandfather instilled in me something that I'll never forget, and he said, "El amal ibada, el shughul ibada." He said, if you want to worship, he saw me wanting to play more guitar than pray, and he said, just remember, your work is your worship. So when you do anything that you do it from your full heart with all sincerity. Uh, and I took music to do that for me. And I tried to consume as much of it as I can to help inform my identity, but also to help learn about the people that were around me, from Egyptian to Lebanese, to learning all of these dialects. Uh, and yeah, it's completely informed my identity as who I am as a person, how I learn, and it's not relegated to just the field of music. I've taken those elements and have applied them to working in the corporate world, teaching, or just how one interacts with other people, things as simple as critical thinking. Music and art. I do a lot of research about arts integration and academic learning, and one of the things that really keeps coming up is practicing an art is not about becoming a professional artist. It's about being artistic, with every endeavor that you do, whether you're sweeping a street, whether you're writing a software program, whether you're teaching somebody or cooking or anything, any practice that you do, that goes back to my grandfather's maxim of your work is your worship. And I took that to understand being an artist is a form of worship as well.
Just a little note, we will be going over time about 15 minutes since we started about 15 minutes late. Proceed, Ronnie. Thank you.
Sure. Um, so I've got some questions here, or some comments. Do you have another question?
No, go ahead.
Okay.
Ronnie, I'm just wondering about the oud that you play. If you could tell us a little about it, about its adaptation as an instrument through the ages in different places, and how for the music for the oud is different in different places, and possibly take us around the world in the music that you play by playing it.
Sure, absolutely. I didn't come to the oud until I was about 16. I started playing percussion when I was younger because my father's a percussionist and my brother is a percussionist. And I just looked at him one day and I said, "Hey guys, I love drums, I love percussion, but one of us has to play melody." And so I picked up the guitar. And my dad said, if you want to be serious about it, that's cool. You save up money to buy the guitar with your allowance and I'll pay for your lessons. And I wanted to play the guitar mainly because I would go. My father had a band here, and it was comprised of people who were Assyrian, Lebanese, Armenian, Iraqi, and him. It's like a United Nations of the Middle East in this band, and that was my first foray in understanding the diversity of the region. And seeing him play with his friends, and I saw his friend playing guitar, so I picked up the guitar and played that for several years, and then switched to the keyboards and I thought, here I am playing all of this Middle Eastern music on instruments made in Japan, and I thought I have to play something that's of my own heritage. So I picked the oud, especially after listening to Simone Shaheen. But then he opened up a whole new world for me, and I realized, like, wow, this instrument is not just in Palestine. Because if you talk to any Palestinian and talk to them about musical instruments, one of the first instruments they're going to say, that's the sound of my childhood, is the oud. So I thought, okay, well, I've taken something that is not only of my heritage, but is also in the diaspora itself. So the origin of the oud in many ways comes back to the development of many instruments. But originally, a lot of instruments used to have an animal skin that created the resonance that you see here. And then some kind of a neck, and maybe gut strings from a cat or silk strings that would comprise that. And so it wasn't until about the instruments like that existed for 2,000 years. But it wasn't until about the 9th century that an instrument like this came about. And in Persia, they call this instrument barbat, but we call it oud, and oud in Arabic means wood. And it's primarily because it's made entirely of wood. And I have nylon strings, but they used to use silk and gut strings. Um, and a lot of people, and I'll answer this question now, a lot of people are always asking, why is that neck curved like that? So I'm just going to answer that question for you now and say, from what a luthier has told me, it's in the past especially, it's to create tension on the strings. So when you turn your pegs, you put them in, you have tension being created here and keeps them locked in place. So that'll answer that question. And in about the 9th century, I discovered an individual, a very enigmatic figure by the name of Ziryab. And legend has it he was a freed African slave in the Abbasid Caliphate. And he found favor in the court of Harun al-Rashid, who was the caliph at the time of Islam. And he played and performed and eventually set off to a new frontier that was being developed in the West, which was Cordoba, Spain. And so he took this instrument, and Ziryab is purported to have made also renovations to it by adding an additional course of strings. So people would consider, like, for example, each course representing an element of for example, air, water, fire, earth. And then he added a course of strings to represent the human soul. And in doing so, he became really expanded the instrument, prolific in creating the music theory, adding to the music theory, which we call maqam, and he added to it a whole set of a suite of different melodies for each hour of the day that he called nuba. And so he took this instrument along with other aspects of the East, from like fashion, um, foods, medicines, a variety of different things, because Iraq at the time was, Beit al Hikmah, house of wisdom, where scholars from all over would come and share in their knowledge. So he goes to Spain, and he's appointed kind of like a minister of culture in Cordoba, Spain, um, by the Emir Abdul Rahman II. And he introduces a variety of different things to Spain, including establishing one of the first kind of music conservatories of Europe, if you will. And Spain became quickly like the golden age, the Renaissance of the medieval Islamic dynasty. He contributed tremendously to the art and culture with not just the instrument, but also fashion, food like asparagus, toothpaste. In fact, the term, if you've ever heard the term from soup to nuts, he coined that phrase because he taught people how to eat in courses over the course of a day. Various things from haircuts, fashion from the East, and whatnot. And so the oud, which was his main contribution to Europe, eventually became the instrument, the European lute. And if you listen etymologically, al-oud sounds like a lute. And in fact, the word lute comes from al-oud. And if you read Latin languages, L apostrophe is an article, the oud, lute. And they added frets to it, whereas this is a fretless instrument, because in Middle Eastern music, like on a piano, you see the black and white keys, and those are half tones, or half steps. Well, in Middle Eastern music, imagine notes that exist between those steps. And so, for example, a major scale might sound like, whereas a Middle Eastern scale that's called rast, a maqam, sounds like this. So it's got kind of a different tone to it that has it's a quarter tone is what they would call it. And eventually that instrument, the European lute, became the guitar. And me being a guitarist originally too, I thought, wow, I came about this backwards. I started playing guitar, and then I came to this. But the history of the oud it's fascinating, because it's played, once it was introduced to Europe and became the lute, it became a bunch of different types of instruments, but it remained a very prominent instrument throughout the Middle East. It's played in North Africa, played in Somalia, it's played in Sudan, it's played in Turkey, it's played in Armenia. Some of the best oud players actually come from Armenia. And all, of course, all throughout the Middle East as well. So that's kind of the origin of the oud in general.
Now we're
About
waiting
some music, Ronnie.
for the musical tour. Yeah, exactly.
A little musical tour for you here. So I'll play something of the Andalusian tradition. I'll play something that is a very well-known piece that is an old poem, and the music was set in about the 17th century. You'll probably know this piece right away. لما بدا going to go to Morocco now. Here's an Andalusian tradition from Morocco, which is يا بنتي بلادي سلموني عينيك يا بنتي بلادي سلموني عينيك وزين اللي فيك قلبي يبغيك وزين اللي فيك قلبي يبغيك يا بنتي بلادي. Ay tarara loca mueve la cintura para no muchacho de la aceituna. Ay tarara sí la tarara no la tarara niña de mi corazón. Then we go all the way to maybe let's go to Palestine here, right? وعلى دلعونا وعلى دلعونا راحوا الحبايب ما ودعونا لا بدي أمين ولا بدي بي بدي حبيبي أسمر اللونة طير الطاير في السما العالي سلم على الحلو العزيز الغالي واسمك يا روحي ما يروح من بالي مقيد عجبيني بين العيون يابا على دلعونا وعلى دلعونا وراحوا الحبايب ما ودعونا لا بدي أمين ولا بدي بي بدي حبيبي أسمر اللونة يابا يا ظريف الطول وقف لك رايح على الغربة وبلادك أحسن لك خايف يا ظريف تروح وتتملك وتعاشر الغير وتنساني أنا يا ظريف الطول غايب عن الأوطان وغيابك عنا مل القلب حزان ارجع لأمك وارجع للحنان ما بتلك الحنية غير في بلادنا وين عرم الله وين عرم الله والفي مسافر وين عرم الله ما تخاف من الله ما تخاف من الله تفيت قلبي وما تخاف من الله. We're gonna go to Lebanon. بنت الشلبية عيونها لوزية بنت الشلبية عيونها لوزية حبك من قلبي يا قلبي وانتي عينيا حبك من قلبي يا قلبي وانتي عينيا حد العناطر محبوبي ناطر حد العناطر محبوبي ناطر كسر الخواطر يا ولدي ما هان عليا كسر الخواطر يا ولدي ما هان عليا بالقلب والروح والقلب مجروح أيام عالبال بتعن والروح أيام عالبال بتعن والروح. From Egypt الحلوة دي متتعين بالفجرية وديك بينده كوكو كوكو بالفجرية يلا بينا على باب الله يا صنايعية يجعل صباحك صباح الخير يا اسطعطية عراق فوق النخل فوق فوق يابا فوق النخل فوق مدري لا مع خدك يابا مدري القمر فوق والله ما ريدا بنيني بلوى. That was a quick brief tour that we can go throughout the Middle East.
يعطيك العافية.
الله يزيدك عافية الله يخليك. Thank you Rana. I see what you're saying. Thank you Rose. I appreciate that.
Yes, I could listen to you all day.
You're not seeing Facebook, but there are a lot of red hearts flying all over the place.
Thank you. Right back at them. Right back to everybody. first and foremost, I want to acknowledge that I'm happy and grateful to see that we can all still connect in such a way in these times. Uh, and I can't express my gratitude to you, Faisal, and Nancy, and everybody on the board at Palestine Museum US for using art as a medium for social change. Because what comes with art also is civility. What comes with art is critical thinking. And it just puts us right back on a track, I think, where the world is quite polarized these days, and we're very reactionary, and rightfully so. I understand, Um, but we need to continue to have hope, and we need to continue to push forward. Um, you know, I'm of the mind where I don't like to try to just follow what people are saying. I respect everybody's opinion. I respect the way people pursue how they want to advocate on their behalf of their culture, or their political views, or whatever it might be. I just, I try to take it one day at a time and get to know people. My mom taught me a long time ago. She said, اللي يجيك بالسلام هو المؤمن. Whoever comes to you in peace is a believer. And it's not just about religion. She just meant it as saying, like, don't ever box people, don't put people in a box to say this person is Christian or Jewish or Muslim. And I have to thank my parents, my Palestinian parents, for really raising us with that understanding, as many Palestinian parents do for their children. Because, you go to Ramallah, my mom, her whole family went to the Quaker school in Ramallah, the French school, a Muslim family at a Quaker school, which was there since 1869, incidentally. And my aunt teaches at the Greek Catholic school in Ramallah. And you see, uh, you know, the mosque is right next door to the church. I'm not going to say that people don't have issues, but it's not really ever a question. I only bring that up to understand that, to say that my identity is tied to being a global citizen. I happen to be from a land where prophets are buried, and where my family has come from, and where they are an indigenous people. I can say this with full heart because I've also had my genetic test to tell it so, and say, this is literally where I am from. I did have about 9% North African in there, but for the most part, it was there. Um, should I can't see any questions, if there are any questions that you have, or
Well, I just, I'm listening to you, and the beautiful thing about the music that you play specifically is letting us realize the similarity of the music in different countries makes us maybe realize how alike we are, how we express ourselves. And whereas spoken language divides us, it seems that music, especially yours, unites us. And I thank you enough for that. Yeah.
Ronnie, before we close, do you have one for the road, or?
I could always do one for the road. Let me think of something a little bit faster, or that doesn't take too much time. One of the pieces I grew up hearing that is always really, every time I hear it, it's just chilling. And it was by Feiruz, and she put out an entire album after 67, dedicated to Palestine, Al-Quds fil Bal. And one of the songs on there that just, I get goosebumps thinking about it, not just hearing it. And I must have purchased 1,000 albums. It's called Zahrat al-Madan. And it's about Jerusalem, basically. And I'll just play a little excerpt of it, since it's a long song, and then I'll probably splice it with something else a little bit more upbeat. Thank you.
Thank you, Ronnie. You've done such a tremendous job today. And I want to
Thank
tell you, when you were playing Zahrat al-Mada'in, you didn't have to sing it because your oud was singing it. Uh, those of us who know the song, they could just hear it. The oud was about to speak almost. It's such a wonderful piece. And it brings back all these images from the TV we used to watch back in 1967 and 68. That there was a video on the Amman, the Jordan TV with that song. It all comes back. It's an amazing song. I know exactly what you meant when you said it gives you goosebumps.
it. Definitely. That was, and you know, those are the, again, music was probably the most music and food. Let's say, because my mother is a caterer, so we cook a lot of Palestinian food. But that, you know, that music and that song really helped me inform my identity. And without it, you know, I don't know where I would be today. I would be a little bit more lost. You know, I wouldn't have had the refined outlook as to what makes me who I am and the identity that I have, and also to recognize the nuances that the Palestinian people have in general, and those in Palestine. When I went back to Ramallah in 2015, I didn't know it because the last time I was in Ramallah before that, the streets weren't even, didn't have asphalt, and I went back and I saw 10-story buildings, and I, where am I? I made it. Every time I ever used to travel, if I was doing a theater gig, something I would do is always get a library card from whatever city I was visiting. So when I did something in Princeton, I went and got a library card at the Princeton Public Library because I had an address there for a little while, and or in Minneapolis. So when I went to Ramallah, one of the first things I wanted to do was go get a library card from Ramallah, and it was a funny experience because they said, here, just fill out this application and let us know. I filled it out. I put my family's address, and they're like, Ronnie Malley, like, I need your full name. I said, oh, okay, Ronnie Khalil Malley. Like, no, I need the full name. I said, all right. And they needed my entire full name, which is, you know, me, my dad, my grandfather, and then my great grandfather in my middle name, and then the family name, which made it really interesting to. It's like I wasn't just getting a library card; I was getting a library card that was vetted by my lineage since in that place, which was even more profound. But it was right next door, I believe, to the Indian or Pakistani embassy. I'm like, there's an embassy in Ramallah. Uh, so I really do have hope. I toured a play, a Broadway musical play called The Band's Visit, and I've been a consultant on this show for about 11 years. And I found it fascinating because it was an Israeli film, but the actors and the characters and half of the cast was Palestinian, were Arabs. It's about a story of an Egyptian band that comes to a town in Tel Aviv, near Tel Aviv, called Petah Tikva, and they are invited and they find themselves in a different place instead of the place they're supposed to be by an error. In any case, the thing that struck me though was uh, that the actors and the music was even composed by a Palestinian composer, Habib Shahada, who's from Nablus, and half of the cast is Palestinian. I thought, wow, where is this? What our people are collaborating in an artistic milieu, and I understand everything that comes along. Being Palestinian is a beautiful thing, but sometimes it can be also a curse in some ways because it, you have to really watch what you do even artistically because can be construed as a political move. And you know, the first step I do always is I ask my mom, and if my mom says it's okay, then I do it. But the next thing I do consider then is, you know, well, what does this mean and implications for everybody else? And then I have to go with my heart in the end. Is this an opportunity for me to learn more about another people? And so I took the job of doing this play, uh, which has, you know, it's mixing Arab and Israeli culture together. So I had an understanding, and there were folks who were living in the United States, but were from Israel in this play, that I would have never ever had a chance to sit and talk to show who I am and for me to see who they are outside of this artistic safe place. It was apolitical, and from that, I gained a wealth of knowledge. I brushed up and learned my Hebrew a lot better as well, because I was also the Arabic dialect coach in the show, but Hebrew was also spoken in this show. And I just thought, I can't let just being Palestinian. I have to remember also being American, and in America, this is a Broadway production. Who gets asked, to do a Broadway production that represents Middle Eastern culture in a positive sense, not as the stereotypes, and turning it down just because I might have had a political brain fart, so to speak. And I decided that this was a very important step in my life to do this. How could you couldn't turn that down? And I gained tremendously from it. I learned a lot, and I think others learned a lot from me as well, as I've received from my Jewish and Israeli counterparts and friends and people that I know. Um, it's a very complex situation to be Palestinian. It's very nuanced, um, as many of you I'm sure understand. It's hard to not conflate the political situation with the human situation. And I'll always choose the human situation because politics change overnight, as we are seeing right now in America. But being human does not. So I leave you with that. Exercise being human and being a good person, regardless of where you come from.
Well, thank you so much, Ronnie. We really appreciate your being with us today, and you certainly you play from the heart and you speak from the heart. We really appreciate that, and that makes a huge difference. On behalf of the museum and on behalf of our audience on Zoom and on Facebook, would like to thank you so much for sharing your day with us today. Thank you, Nancy, for moderating and for the introduction to the show. And we certainly we are going to have you back here again, your time permitting. Hopefully soon. I could tell from the comments that people are making that this is something will be quite desirable for everybody. So thanks again, and we will be seeing you guys next weekend on Saturday and Sunday again. And this has been a great show for us.
Thank you for all that you do, and I really am honored to be on here. And anytime I can help to do anything to help further the cause through the art, I'm here. And thank you to everybody who tuned in today to check us out.
The honor is ours, and we are very proud of you for what you do, what you stand for. Thank you, Nancy. Any final comments?
Just thanking you for sharing what you called your artistic safe space with us today, and giving us an hour and a half of relief from the situation around the world for all the world. I can't tell you how wonderful this was, and thank you so much. We'll have you again. Hopefully you'll agree. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Thank you, everybody. Ma salama.
Ma salama.
Ma salama.